Cybersecurity concerns are ever evolving. OT cybersecurity is even more complex, and it's so much more than just software and hardware. How do you stay on top of it all? Aaron Crow has over 25 years' experience with cybersecurity. 15 of those years focused on operational technology across multiple industries, and he wants to help you. Welcome to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by Industrial Defender. Now here's your host, Aaron Crow.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mollie. Why don't you kick us off? Let us know who you are and give us a bit of your background from how you got to what you're doing today.
Aaron, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Mollie, and I am the founder and CEO of Perygee. And before founding Perygee, I was at the NSA, the National Security Agency for folks that may not know, and was working on IoT, Internet of Things, operational technology, which is what I know we're here to talk about today. And then left the agency to start Perygee. And I'm sure we'll get into more about the story behind Perygee, but in one or two sentences, what Perygee is solving is helping organizations alleviate the burden of securing their non-traditional IT devices, so those IoT, OT devices, and doing it in a very comprehensive way and in a very easy to use way. And we can talk about what it means to be comprehensive, what does it mean to be easy to use, especially in this increasingly digital world, but that's just a little bit about us in a nutshell.
Awesome. So what got you started? Obviously, IT is huge. OT is more recently, everybody's talking about it, but what got you going down that path on the OT side as opposed to, the more traditional IT side?
Absolutely. So it's interesting because when I started going down the path, I didn't know that it was OT on the outside. I didn't even know we were in the cybersecurity space on the outside. When you're doing things from within the NSA, they've got their own acronyms, their own words. But I was noticing that the things that we were looking at were a lot of these teeny tiny little endpoints, not the things that were your traditional IT that is sort of in a one size fits all kind of pattern, or something that is replicated and in vast numbers across the network. But we were solving within the edge cases, and we were solving within these teeny tiny types of devices that I was noticing just in reading the news outside of work. We're starting to really take off within B2B, business to business, enterprise settings. And I had just this thought that, wow, if it's something that we're only starting to look at, and I typically think of NSA as being something that is at the front of the curve, ahead of the curve. What does this mean for the rest of organizations that are starting to adopt these devices and their ability to be able to secure them? And those thoughts formed together to this idea that you could start a company about helping these organizations secure their devices when there's probably not a lot of solutions out there that are going to be able to help them.
Yeah, all my career, I've spent time in the IT side and I've spent time in the OT side. And it's amazing from being on the IT side, being in a team of, large team, global team, lots of people and resources and tools, flipping over to the OT side where I may be doing very similar scope of work on maybe even more diverse assets, mm-hmm. and having a handful, a fraction of the team and budget that I did on the IT side, where the ironic thing is the OT side normally it's like the tail wagging the dog. It's the most critical system and devices and processes that we have in our business structure, but it gets less budget, less people, less resources, less time, et cetera, than it does on the IT side. It's always just the inverse of what it really should be, in my opinion.
Oh, so much to unpack in what you just said. So a couple things, absolutely, we're seeing it get fewer budgets, fewer people. One of the stats I heard, though it's always changing, is IT to OT is somewhere around 10-1 in terms of people and resources. Honestly, that actually sounds pretty good. I walk into a lot of organizations that don't have any dedicated OT security staff whatsoever. And it's completely flipped on the other side in terms of the number of IT devices and how that compares to the number of OT and IoT devices, I mean, it's at least three IoT and OT devices to every one IT device, but that can dramatically change depending on what industry we are in. That's probably in the more vanilla industry, like a financial sector or maybe retail. But as we start getting into oil and gas and utilities, like that ratio of OT to IT could be even wider, and coming back around to just not the same in terms of budgets and people.
Yeah, and it's only getting worse by being that problem is growing as we add more and more capabilities on the OT side. We still don't have anybody driving it from a cybersecurity perspective, from an overall business process perspective. Like, they're looking at the operational side of things. They're plugging in these devices that have these new capabilities that their vendors are selling them, with really no understanding of what the implications of plugging those things into their process and their networks, without some oversight, without tools to monitor them, without understanding what else it does when I do plug it in. Yes, it does this cool thing, but maybe it also does 3 other things that I didn't know when I bought it and plugged it into my environment.
Yeah. It's and the things that are driving how it's only getting worse. I mean, we all saw so many devices get connected around the pandemic, in part because there was a lot of efficiencies that could be gained for people to be able to work remotely by adding in connected technologies. There were a lot of efficiencies to be gained by helping people be more separated and having fewer people come into the site with these connected technologies. But I'm seeing that even additional accelerations for why these things are coming into the network beyond just the pandemic. That's not just a one and done thing, and we're done growing for a little while. Even just as people have gotten more expensive, and more and more we're facing just general shortages of folks within the security sector. I'm finding that organizations are wanting to supplement that with more connected technology and resources to help fill some of those gaps. And all of these things continue to compound and make the case for why we see more of them every single day, and maybe always, and security may be an afterthought.
So what unique problems are you guys solving, and what is that use case that you guys are doing in the IT or IoT space and OT space?
Yeah. So a couple. I'd say there's two main places that we are able to help folks. And generally they fall on, if you were to separate the NIST framework between, there's generally identification and then there's management. Identification, being around what is on my network. Management, I would lump under management, detection, remediation, monitoring, anything that involves action and more of that day-to-day continual aspects of it. And we saw some gaps in both of them, but they're slightly different use cases depending on the maturity of an organization. So for folks that may not know what they have, which a lot of people don't, and even if they do, typically we find that that may be struggling in either, if they have a sense of what they have, they feel a sense of, well, we don't know if we have covered everything. Like, maybe we're 60-70% of the way there, but we don't really have a sense of everything that we're doing. Or maybe we have a pretty good sense of everything, but it's not going deep enough. We don't know where things are located. We don't know where the owner is. We just have this very flat look across our network. So on the asset management side, the core use case is visibility, but visibility with context and visibility with that comprehensive sense of, let's do all of IoT and OT. Let's gather the things that haven't even been turned on yet. Let's gather the things that may have been turned on, but it's been years since they've been used, and maybe you're ready to retire them. Like, let's look at visibility in a holistic way, and then for those devices that we're seeing, let's help you drill down in understanding who the different owners are, how it's being used, who talks to what. And then on the management side, this is the other big gap, is we saw that there's just a lot to get done, not enough security, resources to be able to cover it, and detection has somewhat matured, but response is always where there's a lot of humans in the loop and a lot of manual intervention. And so we help here. People are scared of automation and OT generally because because we're talking about really sensitive networks, we're talking about revenue operations. So we do automation, but we've done automation in a really customizable, easy to configure, easy to deploy kind of way. And that has allowed folks to be able to implement automation, say something like, patching the firmware on devices, but only do it for security cameras in the garage or only for the security cameras in the office building, and not have to go anywhere near the production environment, which can dramatically reduce just the amount of work that folks were otherwise just doing manually, because they weren't able to distinguish between which of my security cameras are in my garage that is totally fine to patch and which ones were in my production environment. So helping on both of these fronts within an organization.
Yeah, and that's great, because the ironic thing is, well, two things, right? Is one, they're hesitant to use automation, and that is absolutely everything that they're doing, from control systems, and it's digital. It's no longer somebody turning a valve. I have some automated control system that's doing that for me, but they don't have control of it. And I always say it's really less that they're against automation, and more so that they don't understand the system. And because they don't understand it, they resist it, because they don't have full understanding and depth and control. Or there's been some IT organization that's come in and tried to push it in their way because they didn't understand the business process, and it's burned them because it's broke something. They tried to patch something that shouldn't have been patched. They pushed something that wasn't applicable. They rebooted something in the middle of the night because it was the IT outage window. There is no outage window in an OT environment. You want the lights to turn on no matter what time of day or night it is. So a lot of those things are that way. And the other piece to that is, how do you do automation and understand the ability of, hey, I can patch these, but I shouldn't do anything with these, unless you have a big picture of all of the assets in your environment, and more than just having a list. Because like you said before, there's really mature asset inventory tools. There's network monitoring and passive detection and all these technologies that are really great. But all they do is say, hey, you have a PLC, you have a camera, you have a widget. You don't really necessarily know where that widget is, what its business function is, how critical is it to the process, et cetera. There's that contextual data that takes it that further step to understanding my process as what the purpose of it is, before I'm comfortable making those automated responses. Or even if it's manual, before patching it all, I need to know what that thing is before I just push it because it's a PLC, right?
Yeah. You're bringing me to a saying that I've heard in the past, which is, you can't automate what you don't know.
Right.
And this is one reason why we really believe that it's important to have the data co-located with the automations, as opposed to being those two separate tools, because there really is a self-fulfilling cycle, some really awesome repercussions that can come when you have really great data feeding feeding the automations that can incorporate that data into what those actions are. And if you separate that, you'll have data but no actions, which we all know doesn't get us anywhere in terms of security resilience. Or you have security actions but not with the right data, and that's where we run into things like downtime and lose business continuity and things that are really critical within an OT environment.
So when you have a hesitant asset owner that you're approaching for taking this, I'm assuming there's some kind of normal progression of, let's start out with baby steps and let's get your inventory and your asset management side taken care of, understand what's in your environment, and then let's take that second baby step of maybe we automate one thing, or we start pushing sub-automated or semi-manual. Then as they build that comfort level, you're starting to more believe in and trust that automated process, to start leaning more heavily on that as opposed to manual processes. What does that process look for you guys?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'll build on it. And one of the philosophies at Perygee is being able to show value in minutes, not months. And so part of this incremental process is in your very well made point, which is let's gradually grow automation. Let's start really small. Let's start with what works. Let's start with what you know to be true, what you're already doing. If a human can do it, we can tell a machine to do it. And let's just start with one use case and grow incrementally from there. That is extremely true. And the benefit of that that flows into this larger philosophy is then you start getting value right away. Like this organization, not only are you gaining trust in the automation, but actually you've just had something taken off your plate that you may have otherwise had to wait 9 months if you were to only turn this thing on and expect everything to work right away. And our goal is to help people, crawl, walk, run in this process. And we've built the platform in that way. It's not the case that, oh my goodness, we're totally useless if we don't have this one module on or we don't have access to the spam port. We've actually built it in a way that whatever data source you're willing to give us, whether that's a spreadsheet, whether that's just one asset, whether that's an integration into some existing system or the spam port, we're able to build on that and add these things over time, either as you get more comfortable with it or just as resources free up and the network engineering team is able to turn something on that otherwise wasn't able to be turned on before.
Yeah, that's awesome because, again, going back to how small these OT teams are, to your point though, if this savings doesn't happen, it may be the difference between doing it at all or ever, or waiting 2 or 3 years before a vendor comes out and does it for you, or not doing it at all. And being able to give these asset owners another lever to pull, another way that they can maintain their availability and the reliability of their system without having to just, I'm air gapped. And we know that air gapped is not good enough anymore. That is one attack vector, and that is not going to stop you from having your system impacted. And it's not always nation states, right? Is that's the thing that you see in the news, and that's the thing that you coming from the NSA, I'm sure you guys saw a lot of that. And we see the alerts that come out, and that is a real threat. But it's not the only threat, and it's probably not even the most common threat. There's a lot of other common threats that are out there, and air gapping my system doesn't fix them, right? When a vendor brings his laptop in and plugs it directly in, and he has malware, he brought it in. He bypassed all of your security controls by air gapping it and assuming that everything else was good and not having to patch it. Well, I don't have to worry about that, right? It's interesting how we just assume that putting in a firewall. Oh, I got a firewall, I'm good, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I gave an example recently to somebody in terms of, here's an example of something that we would block. And it happened to be an example that the threat vector underneath the hood, the only way someone would really act on it is if they were some type of nation state actor. And this person called me out and was like, because the example is compelling, but that really doesn't affect me because I'm actually not that worried about nation state actors. We should all be worried, but just in his relative purview, it wasn't the most important thing. And his comment was, I'm actually a lot more worried now that some handheld device on the shop floor could connect back to our data center. And if we had somebody who was mad at us and worked at the company, that is a path that they could use within the organization. And your comment on the types of things that people are worried about. Sometimes it's these really large scale, what happens on the front page of the news, what we may have been thinking about when we were at the NSA, is also, there's a long tail of a lot of other issues that are on a CISO's mind, on a security team's mind, that are important to think about when we're thinking about these OT environments.
So what's a use case or a good example of something you're excited about that you've maybe a fun project that you've done that you can talk about? Obviously, you can spare the names to leave the innocent out, but something that you guys have done that you're proud of, and an example use case that people can kind of put their heads around what this may look like.
Yeah, well, one thing that we haven't talked as much about, and I'll give the example of the use case, but
Sure.
I'll describe the persona a little bit too, because I think it could naturally lead to another really interesting area that's developing within OT, which is what's happening just among smaller and medium-sized businesses, and
Right.
And how everybody has OT, and in large part, a lot of these technologies have been catered towards teams that have resources to be able to support them, but as OT affects everybody, there's not as many resources or not as many solutions catering towards smaller organizations. And while we work with clients of all sizes, we have found that smaller organizations with smaller teams get a lot of benefit from something that is comprehensive and easy to use. As comprehensive because it has a lot of things out of the box, and easy to use because there's not as much of a training period. You don't need to have experts. So an example of a use case was working with a small healthcare institution. Healthcare's got a lot of OT. They often call it biomed. They often call it devices, but it is. I think of it as operational technology in the sense that it's critical to their operations and is responsible for revenue. If your MRI machines go down, you're not going to make money off of that scan.
Right.
Anyway, so we come in, they're a small organization, think along the lines of under 250 people. And one of the places we were able to start was identifying and monitoring their devices, and specifically their security cameras. And we're able to go not only identify all their security cameras, but by using the custom automations and workflows and the fact that we're comprehensive, check the security cameras to see what their latest firmware was, check to see if that was the latest firmware that the manufacturer said they should have, do that differentiation. If they need to be updated, go out and reach and update those devices, all from the Perygee platform, not needing to rely on a third party, not needing to rely on integrations, just from where we were sitting in the network, and complete that end-to-end use case. And it goes to show the two sides of the spectrum, both from the identification side, the context and the context that comes with it, and then beyond, the remediation and the action that would otherwise, I've heard people say these firmware updates can take hours to months.
Oh, yeah.
Each one manually. Man, I could keep going, because when they do each one manually, they have to go and make sure that security camera turns back on, and we're able to, even after we've implemented the update, go in and say, yep, and it turned back on. We're good. Move on to the next one.
Well, think about it. Like, a lot of those cameras are, like, they may be way up high, if it's in a manufacturing facility, or even in a hospital, like you just mentioned. They're not going to be easy to get to. So I'm going to have to get a ladder. I'm going to have to rope off the area. I'm probably not going to want anybody in that area as I'm working on it. There's a lot of really hard things that go into that. And even if manually I can do it from a closet where I have to plug into a switch with a laptop, I'm still having to manually go through every one of those, validate it. And we're dealing with human performance then, right? Is what if I skip a step? What if I typo the command? What if I upload the wrong firmware for the wrong device, and I take off the device that I thought I was taking off? I've seen it 1,000 times where I think I'm working on this camera, but I'm actually working on this camera, and that one should have been on, and this one is the one I was supposed to be doing maintenance on, right?
Yeah. Oh man. I'm sure I know one of my very first jobs. This was actually pre-NSA, one of my interns. It wasn't even a full-time job. I was just an intern at this company. And my job was to be a tester and just make sure everything was working. As a software engineer said, I had a little script and had to go against it and check these screenshots. And man, it is tough work to make sure that you follow all the steps that, even with everything in front of you, to make sure that you follow all that through.
And there's a reason why we use machines to make us more effective, right? They can check that code way quicker than we can. They're going to be more accurate than we are. If we put 100 of the best humans that we have in a room against computers will win every time, because they just can check it that much faster. It's what they natively do. It's not what we natively do. It's really hard for us visually to see the difference in code. Like, if we put two lines of code side by side, some people are better than others, but we're still struggling because it doesn't come naturally to us. We see patterns, but it's really hard to see those differences in patterns, because an uppercase or a lowercase may look similar. Some characters may look the same, but they're different. And we see them as similar, but the computer sees them as they couldn't be any more different. It knows immediately that there's a difference between those two things. Absolutely.
And one of the things that I started at NSA as a mathematician, did a lot of machine learning work. One of my favorite philosophies or truisms, so to speak, is this idea that it's really hard to tell a computer something that a human doesn't know how to describe. So to your point around, a computer can pick up on two very distinct things. If machines are operating even just a fraction differently, and this is getting into predictive maintenance areas. Computers really good at spotting that, while the human eye cannot. But a human is probably really good at describing how they might be different. Oh, one is going to be performing faster than the other, or one is going to be performing slower. And as long as we can encode those things, machines are really good at taking care of the rest. But one of the areas that we focus on a lot when we're bringing together data is bringing the data from an organization that really matches people's mental model, really matches how it's used, how it's talked about. And we find that that's a way of continuing to help machines be faster, but by describing it in a way that is human readable, easier to understand, help them make sense of that complexity.
So how much time savings is that example you gave? How much time savings was that bringing to this organization from maintenance lost or downtime or employees manually having to patch those devices and devices going offline and all of that? Is there any estimate you have for how much they saved for that?
Wow, I'm doing the math. For this organization, I'm trying to think about how many. I'd say. I'm doing the math because we had for another organization, they had somewhere around 30,000 cameras, and it took them 9 months to update them all. Wow. And then through Perygee, we were able to do that in a matter of minutes. And so this organization had much smaller devices. So I'd say we probably saved them. If they had around 300 devices, you can do the math on it. We're talking about the
Sure.
fact of 100, but somewhere around a month's worth of work of manually updating those devices.
But there's a reason I asked that question, right? Is because, and it starts out from the beginning when we started this conversation around, it's hard to find resources, and most organizations don't have the funding and the resources, whether it be people, process, or technology, around this OT side. So if you can take a product that can actually bring them savings, operational, and they can retain that savings, maybe not it's a financial, maybe it costs them money. Obviously, it's going to cost them money to get that, but can they save time and people and processes in the long run? That's an easier justification than, hey, it's just going to cost you more money. It's not going to be any easier. It's going to be harder. It's going to take you more time, and it's going to cost you more money. That's a hard sell. But if you can tell them, hey, yes, it's going to cost you some money. We're going to have to set this thing up. But once you get it, then I'm going to save you an FTE or 2 FTEs that don't have to focus on this. You can have a half FTE that can do this. You can have all your stuff, and then you can have those other 2 people do whatever else you want them to do.
Absolutely. We find that we can save organizations money in a couple different ways, and which one we stress or we present jointly with the CISO to their leadership. We suss out through discussion, but time savings is a big one. I've heard from organizations that reducing the time to respond to threats can also be one that can really win over their leadership. So we'll present on that one. Some folks are really cyber insurance centric, so we can help. Usually we find that OT security platforms can help reduce cyber insurance between 10 and 20%. So we can help make the case around that. And then we can also help by there's some really big companies that come with some really expensive contracts that may be somewhat in the OT space, but maybe fractionally, and we can help them take a layer off of that and move that to Perygee. So it depends a little bit on the org and their setup and how they're measuring success. But there's a couple inroads we see that can help them see not just the immediate benefit of how it might help them, but the long-term ROI.
Yeah, and obviously that's a big sell in that executive and C-suite level, right? Is understanding what is my ROI, what is my cost to this, what is the value that I'm getting from this long-term, short-term. What does it look like 1 year, 5 year, 10 years down the road? Because as we know, this cyber thing is not going away. It's going to be growing, and I'm going to have to focus more and more of my time on this, or at least resources. Now, the more that I can automate, to your point, the more that I can automate these things, I don't have to have a one-to-one relationship with people and process and technology. I can start to automate, and that automation makes me more efficient. And the more that I can do with one person, now that one person can have multiple roles or do multiple functions, and not have to have one person or one team that's doing patching of their cameras. I can reduce that down to a select few, and then have them have ability to do other things as well. It makes my overhead costs better. It makes my efficiencies better. I'm making less mistakes. I'm having less downtime. All those are things that these OT spaces, we've been talking about those availabilities and capabilities on the operational side the whole time. And it seems like, for whatever reason, most cyber initiatives, products, et cetera, have been lacking in understanding that there needs to be an operational tie and savings to these things, at least an understanding of what it's easy to get capital money. It's harder to have that O&M long-term, tail to maintain it and support it and run it into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I have found is it can sometimes be hard to, when you start talking about operational tie-in, it can be hard to translate that when you're talking to a security person.
Sure.
Start talking about safety or availability. But the commonality that I found that resonates with both OT folks and the security team is business continuity. Everybody seems to understand the language of business continuity, and how that can be there's a security angle and how it can resonate there. There's an operational angle. So just a recurring theme that we've heard, that we'll continue to see how that develops. But it seems we all know that these are traditionally distinct cultures that are building new relationships and learning how to work together, and that's a common thread that it seems has resonated across both sides of the aisle.
So what are some of the big problems that you're looking to kind of attack in the next 5 to 10 years in Perygee?
Yeah, it's Perygee.
Perygee, excuse me.
Absolutely. Wow, 5-10 years is a long time horizon, which is great. But so one of them that comes to mind, and I'll think a little bit more as I continue talking. But one thing that we're not necessarily seeing today, and I'll be curious to see how this develops, is today there's still a separation within organizations between security teams and operations teams, and we were I was just alluding to this idea around how do you develop a shared language. And it's no secret that there should be some amount of shared data, some amount of shared processes, but I do think it can be hard when you're wanting to partner with one of these organizations to figure out, where does OT security live? Because a security team may say that lives on the plant side of things. The plant may be like, this is security, that lives in the security side of things. And over the 5 to 10 years, we'll have to see how orgs develop and whether there'll be more shared teams with a joint responsibility of something like OT security. We see this already in the utility sector and in the oil and gas sector, which has had a long history of OT, but in some of these newer sectors, which don't have as much of a history around securing their OT, maybe that will be something that will change. And we're, coming back to something on Perygee's roadmap is, how do we help to be that central fabric, that central data layer, that central management layer that can help tie these organizations together, maybe not necessarily through being in the same org, but being able to share more easily these processes. And the day that does come around where maybe there's a shared team, there's a natural evolution to continuing to stay with a platform like Perygee. So that's one big area. The second big area I would see is building more of a community around. I mean, there already is a huge community. It's a small community, but a big community around OT. But how do we share more learnings with one another through templates and sample reports and marketplaces and data? And we've got some ideas on how we can start to share learnings more publicly, shared resources that Perygee is seeing and individual users are using, and be able to put them in a place that other organizations can take advantage of. I'm trying to think of some software that benefits this, that does something kind of similar that would resonate with OT audiences. It would be something along if people have ever used Airtable or a Figma, some of these solutions that have individual workplaces that are able to contribute to a shared marketplace, I think could really benefit and lift up folks that are just getting started to benefit from an organization with a more resourced team that has made these templates that they could borrow from.
Yeah, I think that's super powerful, right? Is even in organizations, to your point, right? Your OT side and your IT side, they don't share information. Like the OT side is very much, this is mine, don't talk, don't look at it, don't touch it, don't even, think about it, right? It's, I've got it, don't worry about it. But that was the way it's been up until fairly recently, and many organizations still run that way. But that's not the way, that's not the best way to protect these environments, to make them more efficient, et cetera. The IT side does have the ability. I mean, we're probably 20 years behind IT and all the efficiencies and technologies and capabilities that we've started to really be good at in the IT side. There's a lot of benefit that we can learn from the OT side, but we can't just take IT side capabilities and processes and dump them into OT, because that doesn't work either. But ignoring it or having this, great wall of China between IT and OT where you don't look at, you don't talk about it, that doesn't work either. And it's even beyond that. We saw from 9/11 and all the issues between organizations with, communicating between fire and police and hospitals and inter-organizations. Like, they worked on that on the defense side, but we still have to work on that in the OT side. Like, you look at critical infrastructure, and we need to be able to have a way that we can share information between different organizations, sometimes even within the same company. Transmission is different than distribution, is different than generation. Same at manufacturing. You've got a car manufacturing facility, and the paint environment is different than the auto, the drivetrain or whatever, right? But we need to be able to share information that doesn't make us less secure, that doesn't risk our business process, doesn't share the secret Coke recipe.
Yeah.
That's not part of what needs to be shared. What needs to be shared is just the other stuff, the things that, like you said, machines are really good at seeing two machines and saying, hey, one of them is not running right. Like, that looks off. You should go take a look at that. Whereas a human, an operator will walk by and, it sounds right. Everything's green. Everything looks good. It may take 6 months before a human can recognize that there's an issue, and by that time, maybe it's too late. And there's a lot that we can do in that to share, but some of that begins with building trust and relationships between those organizations and finding paths that we can share information without releasing proprietary information, et cetera. So I love that you're thinking that way, because that I believe that's one of the big things that we've got to tackle in OT within organizations and shared amongst multiple, varying organizations as well.
Yeah, man, just even going off of your example of, it would take a plant manager maybe 6 months to figure out the machine is behaving differently. Where do you think they're getting that data? Probably from the network.
Right.
What data is the machine analyzing, or what data is getting collected? Probably the network data. Who has the network data? Not the plant manager. It's going to be somebody. It's going to be the network engineer, or somebody on the security team. And it goes back to a very, very small but concrete example of this information can often be siloed, and how do these insights get shared across?
Well, and then you take that and you expand that upon, going on that example, right? Is okay, we found something on the network, and this is a difference that we should be. Let's look for that characteristic across other environments, other sites within our organization. Oh, we found it at 3 more. Okay, well, let's share those details with other organizations. Hey, are you guys seeing any of this behavior in your environments? Because that thing could be in multiple environments, whether it's a malware, whether it's any nation state actors, whatever those things may be. Those are the things that we've got to figure out how to share those details. What, again, going back to, I'm not sharing the secret Coke formula. I'm sharing that network data that says this is different, something is going on here, these are the things to look for. We're really focused on what are the things, if Sun Tzu, Art of War, things don't change very often in OT space. Mm-hmm. That is a weakness and a strength. The weakness is I'm not patching as frequently, I'm not making as frequent changes as I am in an IT environment. I don't have the latest and greatest firmware and operating systems and hardware. The inverse of that is, because things don't change that often, when things change, I should notice it. Like, I should be able to see, wait, something's different over there. Why is it different? Nothing ever changes here. So when something changes, it should be really obvious to see that it changed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This is bringing me, I was just talking to somebody recently about change, and this is going in a totally different direction, but it was around upgrades. And one of the reason things don't change for a couple different reasons. One, OT is very stable. That's, it's things don't change, but also things aren't changing because we're not replacing equipment every 3 years.
Right.
Think about in an IT world, the average life cycle is 3 years or so. I mean, I should replace my computer by that logic because it's over 3 years old. But in OT world, it is. I once heard 18 years, but that seems like an underestimate with some of the things that we've both collectively seen in these environments. It's probably generous, and it's really expensive to replace this equipment, not only from a pure machine cost, but as soon as you replace it, all of a sudden your timers are off. Like when two machines were exactly timed to be 2 minutes apart and now you've replaced it and the processor is faster, everything else about that line is going to be off. And so putting security into place not only means being able to look for those things that are differences, but also making sure that the security you put in place doesn't cause additional changes as well, and that pull factor.
And that's key to remember, and I think that's, you hit on a great point there, right? Is I think that's one of the reasons why on the IT side and sometimes in the executive side, they don't always understand why you can't just rip and replace. It's not as easy as replacing that Windows XP machine with a brand new one, right? Because yes, technically you can do that. But does the software work on it? What domino effect, downstream impact will it have on the business process? And will it break the conveyor belt, or will it not communicate with that third-party system that only worked with that XP system, and now you have to replace that thing? And then when you place that, then you got to replace something else, and you don't really understand all the interconnections and all the dependencies upon that one device. It's not as easy as just replacing that one. I have to, more than likely, many times I've seen, I have to replace it all, which gets really expensive. Not to mention just the cost of the control system, the cost of the labor. I'm having to do it more than likely in an outage. So I'm having to take the unit down. I'm not producing anything. So I'm losing money on that perspective, and it's costing me money on top of that. And then there's a risk that when I get everything replaced, that I try to start it back up and it doesn't work. And then I'm additional downtime, and then I'm paying expensive contractors and consultants and engineers and people to fly over, and all of those things are risks that those asset owners are like, it is not worth the risk for me to go into a large project like that if I don't absolutely have to. If it's not broken, don't fix it. That's a lot of the way we look at it in OT for very good reason.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's because of the issues that we've had in the past, but I think that people are starting to we're starting to see that you can do some things, to your point. You can automate some things. There are ways to save some things where I don't have to just go replace all the systems. It doesn't mean I have to patch every system with every patch that comes available. There's a lot of automation that I can use in products like yours that help them to see I can do the right things, and I can prioritize those without having to take everything down, rip everything out, patch every system within 5 minutes. Like it's finding the scale and the right things to do in the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like an example of this would be, say in an ideal world, sure, you would patch all of your systems when a vulnerability comes out. Sometimes that's obviously not possible in an OT world. So how do you go one step backwards and go to the firewalls and say, great, well, how do we make sure that these Rockwell devices are only getting data from Rockwell servers on the outside, and only allowing that type of traffic, and recognizing that, I always like to use the analogy of a light switch versus a dimmer, recognizing that it's not a light switch, it's not a light switch, it's not either or. There's a dimmer effect, and there are incremental ways to add security into these things that can help maximize the security while minimizing the operational impact. So with that, what is in the next, we already talked about the things that you guys are going to work on in the next 5 to 10 years as you're thinking about working on. My final question to you is, what is, in the next 5 to 10 years, what's something that maybe you're excited about coming up on just in cyber in general that you see, and maybe what's something that concerning, maybe something that's scary coming up on the horizon from the cyber perspective? Wow. So something, and we're talking broadly,
Yeah,
correct?
absolutely. Yep.
I guess broadly about cyber, I mean, I'm always just increasingly excited by how many other people are increasingly excited about cyber. I have wanted to be, when I was a little kid, all I wanted to do was be a spy. And then I found out I was really bad at languages, but I was kind of good at math, and hence, fast forward, and I worked at the NSA. But uh, now that same, I wouldn't wish upon everyone that they necessarily have to be a spy, quote unquote, but I would wish upon everyone to have some awareness around cyber and an appreciation for not just what it's protecting against, but what it's also able to accelerate. Like, I think we forget a lot about where security can help things move more quickly and help us embrace innovation more quickly. So I'm really excited by seeing the number of people taking interest in this space at every level, from people coming out of college to the boardroom. In terms of things that are concerning, I wouldn't necessarily say it's concerning, but it seems like everyone is talking about AI right now. So I'll just leave with some other thoughts that we're having on the team in talking about AI, and in terms of how we think it could be used in cyber in the right way. And I'm really interested in seeing the implementation of vertical AI. And I say this as somebody who, I worked out of the AI ML portfolio at the Pentagon when I was a mathematician at the NSA. So I've seen some applications of AI, and what I see being successful or a good use of AI is being able to, what AI is really good at is either being really general. It's not very good at being specific. If you've ever asked it to email to respond to, if you ever put an email into AI and asked it to write a response, pretty bad at that, I'm like that. But it can get better and better the more specific you are. And so an application within a platform like Perygee it's got some really good data that's really, really specific, and that will allow it to be even more specific in practice. So I guess the concern underpinning that would be the general use of that, and getting back to that one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't make sense for OT. But of course, leaving on a positive note would be there's a lot of opportunities for more of a vertical specialization, and startups like Perygee can help lead the way with that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, deep down, I think my kids are still young enough that that they still kind of think I'm some kind of a special agent or something, because I do cybersecurity and protect the grid and all that kind of stuff. So I love that they actually think that, and they're excited about what Dad does, even though they have no idea what I do, which is funny in and of itself. They know I'm doing a podcast right now, so they're excited about that, and they think I'm a celebrity because I'm on a podcast, and I tell them that only really nerdy people like to listen to my podcast. So
Well, that's the best. That's great.
Exactly. Well, hey, thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation. Why don't you tell everybody how do they get in touch with you guys? Kind of call to action for anybody listening.
Absolutely. You can check us out on our website. It's Perygee, and Perygee is spelled Perygyee, and our website is perygee.com. That's a great place. And you can always find me at LinkedIn. It's Mollie with an IE, last name Breen. Would be really looking forward to connect with anybody.
Awesome, Mollie. Thank you again for your time today. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll see each other at an event coming up soon.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast. If you got some valuable information from today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Aaron and to get your free copy of the OT Cybersecurity Solution Buyer's Guide, go to industrialdefender.com. That's industrialdefender.com, or you can click the link in the show notes.